Hello, welcome to week 14 in Sociology of Death and Dying. This week we are going to talk about human composting and organ donation. So in your chapter for this week, in From Here to Eternity, the chapter on North Carolina, they talk about a really interesting and fascinating facility at Western Carolina University. And this is the Forensic Osteology Research Station, or the Forest Lab. It is one of the only labs of this type in the country, so a very small handful of similar facilities in the country. And at this facility, you have forensic anthropologists who are studying body decomposition. And so as Caitlin Doughty talks about in this chapter, bodies that are donated to the Forest Lab, you can donate your body to Western Carolina University and to this lab specifically, and should you choose to do so, your body will be laid out to study how it decomposes naturally. So bodies are laid out just on top of the ground, and we have lots of researchers studying how they decompose naturally. This is also a place that is used for law enforcement training, especially for cadaver dogs to be able to come and practice smelling human remains. So it is very popular for that purpose as well, because like I said, it's one of a very small handful of facilities like this in the entire United States. Another thing that is talked about is the Urban Death Project. So Katerina developed the Urban Death Project, which is a really interesting kind of project that studies body decomposition. And they have figured out that they can offer this service of basically creating a kind of compost mixture from people's remains by mixing nitrogen items and carbon items together. And with using a body as the basis and mixing these nitrogen and carbon items together, we have about a 4 to 6 week timeline for a body to decompose into a dirt-like substance. So at the end, the families can come and collect the remains or the dirt that is really left over and use them any way that they choose, right? They can, plant them, a tree and use it as soil to nourish the tree, or flowers, or any purpose that people see fit. So we're going to talk more about human composting. It's pretty rare, but becoming more popular actually in the United States. And so I encourage you to watch this video from this company, Recompose, that engages in human composting and offers this as a service. It's just a really informative video that talks about the process, talks about kind of what to expect from families for people who choose to have their body composted. So this is the first human composting facility in the United States. And the legal term is natural organic reduction. Understandably, they prefer this term to human composting, but it is essentially what they're doing is, right, turning your body into compost. This other organization, Return Home, this is a really interesting video as well, kind of talking more about this process of human composting. So 13 states currently have legal human composting. And this is a really interesting timeline of the legalization of human composting. So we can see that only in the last few years, there have been a lot of developments, right? As of 2019, Washington became the first state to legalize human composting. And then fast forward with each kind of subsequent year, we can see that more and more states have legalized human composting. And then as of 2024, as of last year, there were bills to legalize human composting introduced in Utah, among other states. But currently, 13 states have legal human composting. So there are a few reasons why human composting is illegal still in most states. So we're going to kind of go through those 4 reasons right now. The first reason is that some funeral homes and crematories have lobbied against it. Right, kind of similar to what we saw with aquamation, where it is kind of a threat to traditional funeral business. So there has been a pretty decent lobby against the legalization of human composting because it could potentially interfere with traditional funeral practitioners' market share and profits. Second reason why it is illegal in most states is that it's a relatively new concept. And it's a relatively new kind of way of disposing of somebody's remains. And so there are kind of a lack of clear guidelines as a result of it just being a kind of newer process. There's a lack of legislative framework as well around it. So really the sort of legal landscape is a little bit unclear at the moment. And then there are some challenges, right, when it comes to sort of cultural norms surrounding death, especially like thinking about this sort of crude nature of using the word composting, right? It kind of interferes with how we kind of think about preserving and the importance of like preservation rituals around people's bodies and their remains. So even though it's, has a lot of potential for sustainability and environmental benefits, some individuals and religious groups think that, human composting is disrespectful to the dead. And that's definitely up for debate, right? It definitely, at the very least, challenges a lot of our cultural norms around respecting the deceased. And then lastly, opponents of human composting have kind of raised some concerns about public health and safety. So they argue that composting human remains at a large scale might pose the risk of spreading diseases or contaminants, potentially impacting soil quality. However, it's worth noting organizations like Return Home, that we talked about on the previous slide, emphasize that their process is carefully controlled and adheres to pretty rigorous standards of safety to mitigate any potential risks. Okay, so in this chapter, From Here to Eternity on North Carolina, they talk about some of the misinformation around human composting. And specifically, they talk about how, Mike Adams, a conspiracy theorist, kind of spread some of this misinformation around human composting. Caitlin Doty mentions that, part of this is kind of getting at this like fear of forced euthanasia of elderly and disposing of bodies in a really crude way. And so she's pretty critical of some of the spread of this misinformation. All right, now we're going to switch gears a little bit, talk a little bit about organ donation. So this is a short video that just explains the organ donation process in a really clear manner. And one of the big things that people are often unaware of when it comes to organ donation, especially upon death, right? There's kind of different types of organ donation. We're obviously talking about donating one's organs after death, as opposed to being a living donor, which would be different. But after your death or when you pass away, you can donate these organs. You can donate your kidneys, potentially, your heart, your liver, your pancreas, your intestines, and your lungs, as well as skin, bone and bone marrow, and your cornea. It's not a guarantee, obviously, that these will be viable organs or parts that can be donated, but these are all the things that can potentially be donated upon your death. Okay, so last little bit for this week, we are going to talk about some kind of outside research published in this book called Twice Dead about organ transplantation and donation by Margaret Locke, who's an anthropologist. And she argues that organ transplants among those who are dead has led us to collectively rethink how we categorize death and how we think about death. And so on the previous slide, we talked about, after your death, all of the potential things that can be donated, right? And some of these things include major organs. And in reality, in order to donate a major organ, you have to have the physical body being kept alive in some capacity for some time, right? And so the majority of transplanted organs from deceased individuals come from individuals who are diagnosed with or as being brain dead, but their bodies are being kept alive, right? So that their organs can be harvested. So most people who are, receive this diagnosis of being brain dead are kept alive on a ventilator, even if there's no brain functioning, brain activity whatsoever. They're kept alive on a ventilator so that their organs can be donated to somebody else, right? And so Margaret Locke argues that this practice of kind of keeping people alive, or keeping their bodies, I should say, going for organ donation, kind of has led us to, rethink the boundaries between life and death, right? This kind of use of medical technology for this purpose has forced us to reconsider the boundaries between life and death. And she argues that, in the presence of these advanced technologies, there is kind of this gray area. There's this kind of disagreement or set of disagreements about what constitutes death. Is it brain death, or is it when the rest of your physical body shuts down? And where is the line if it is somewhere in between? So just some interesting kind of food for thought to end this week on is thinking about how this practice of not only organ donation, but specifically the use of technology to keep people's physical bodies alive long enough to be able to extract organs and have them donated, even in the presence of, especially in the presence of brain death, kind of lets us rethink these boundaries between life and death.